serious researchers in a museum.
Maybe you could glean some of their technical perspectives from the work.
Well, I calculated everything in the Dow Jones already, so I don't know how much new information it would be. I've checked every astronomic kind of event that there were more than 3 or 4 of during the period, and some of the things which were only 3 or 4 of, but they were big things, and there were large movements into and out of those large combinations of planets. For instance, we're talking about the Mayan calendar. That date that was the harmonic convergence in 1987 was suspected to be around the 17th of August. And I looked at that date. I didn't see anything important, but I was moving my computer ahead one day at a time. And here, 7 days later, on the 24th of August, is the tightest 5-body conjunction in at least 800 years that I checked. And it was all in favorable aspect to Jupiter. And I said, it doesn't get any better than this. So what does that mean? It means it's a top. So I wrote in the newsletter, this market will peak on August the 24th, give or take 3 days, after which we will have a horrendous crash. And if you go back and look, the high close was August the 24th, the date of the 5-body conjunction trine Jupiter. Then it dropped. The first leg down, it went down, scared the heck out of traders on a solar eclipse on the fall equinox, turned around and had the biggest up day in history in points. It rallied for 2 weeks. At the top of that rally, we had the biggest earthquake in Southern California in at least 7 years, which was probably triggered by the lunar eclipse on October 6th. And the October 6th date was the biggest down day in history to that date, and started to slide into the crash.
Well, I think that's an interesting segue, Arch, into your talk about every market crash that's taken place has occurred after Mars and Uranus were opposing each other at 180 degrees. I wonder if you could tell us if you see anything else along those lines.
One of the situations, the last time it hit was 2008, and we had a solar eclipse just like yesterday that went entirely over the entire area of Russia and ended in China. And 3 days later, or 4, I forget which, it's early August, August the 6th, I think it was the Mars-Uranus opposition. And that was the day Russia chose to attack Georgia. Now, the American stock market hit a high on the solar eclipse, dropped back a day on the Russian attack, ticked back up to a slight new high in the next day or two, and then started the drop that went into the crash in 2008.
You actually are sort of bracing for lower prices when you talk about puts and shorts.
Absolutely, yeah.
2010, 2011, maybe difficult times ahead?
Yes, very. The 2012 date is another Mayan calendar date. It's the end of a cycle that's 25,600 years old.
I thought it was even longer than that. A completion of our solar system's revolution around the galactic center?
Yes.
There's another grand cycle, I forget. And isn't there a cycle of galaxies? And it was something like 240,000 years, I thought.
Yes, there is. I think that's the Indians calculated those things. We're in the midst of the Kali Yuga, but I don't know if this particular time is terribly important to them or not. This alignment is bound to mean something to everybody.
Just put it in modern terms. I don't think it's too difficult for people to get their minds around the idea of our solar system making its way around the Milky Way, the arms of a spiral galaxy. It takes, as you say, approximately 25,000 years for one revolution to occur. And I guess if we look back through the geological strata, we'd probably find a lot of interesting occurrences at that time.
Well, the ages, like the age of Taurus, when changed to the age of Aries, when Moses broke the golden calf, and Moses was the emphasis on Aries. Then we got into the age of Pisces. There were several major teachers that came around the time that the movement was into the pointing of the North Pole went into the Pisces area. And the Pisces religions came up born in 500 years at the beginning of the Piscean age. Well, we're now in the area of the beginning of the Aquarian age, but to go around that whole thing is like 2,500 years per sign, and that's the 25,600-year cycle.
If you look at this 25,000-year cycle that apparently comes to a head or a focal point in 2012, do you care to speculate?
Well, I believe that this alignment may be a part of the falling apart syndrome that will lead to going back to some kind of baseline.
Perhaps could see something very unusual like a loss of electromagnetic polarities and things of that nature. So suddenly, computers, electronics, cell phones, and particularly generators, motors, anything based on Maxwell's theories would suddenly just cease to work altogether.
Yes, that's possibly true. I think it's more likely what has been recognized more recently is if we get an atomic pulse in the right place, it'll fry the electric grid.
An EMP pulse in the atmosphere, yeah, that's quite interesting and plausible, too.
And it could be sunspots.
Sunspots? I thought we're at one of the lowest levels of sunspot activity in a decade or two now.
We do, but sometimes a flare starting on a low level of solar activity is probably more damaging than when it hits at a high level of solar activity, because the high level of solar activity has already built a heavy ionospheric envelope around the Earth. But if it hits out of a low level where there's no protective sheath already around the Earth, it could actually be much worse.
So it'd be almost like facing a disease with no inoculation whatsoever.
Well, it's happened to Canada. I think they had one of their major grids got fried 10 or 12 years ago, and they were out for maybe a week or two.
So you think then that we might experience a catastrophic solar flare within the next couple of years or something along those lines, and that might cause havoc with anything based on an electrical source?
Yes, I'm just saying that these are the most powerful times in all of human history, and whatever can happen, some of them will.
Very good. I'd like to discuss precious metals, including, of course, AG and AU.
I believe that during this whole period here, that the fiat currencies will go to zero, and at some point in here. And as long as we're having these smaller countries going under, there is a rush to keep the dollar afloat. So the people are still going to silver, gold, and the dollar. And
you're referring to the Euro sovereign debt concerns?
Yes. And so as long as those are hitting, but I believe at some point they'll turn on the dollar as well, and it's just fiat currencies. There's a loss of faith in government's power to do anything, and of course, in the face of all this natural energy, the governments are going to do very little. I believe that the fiat currencies will drop because people are losing faith in their governments. The fiat currencies you only get anything if you have trust in the government being able to give you anything. There's no backing of any of the fiat currencies at this time.
But extrapolate forward a little bit with your thoughts there, and then the dollar and all currencies going to zero, nearly an infinite value on precious metals and other assets.
Yes, that's possible.
Would you care to put a probability on something like that and a time frame?
Well, I think it'll be between now and maybe a year after the Mayan date that a lot of things will go to zero.
It's interesting that this coincides so well with Robert Prechter's work. The Elliott Wave Institute is just down the highway here. Prechter is calling for a sub-1,000 Dow Jones Industrials average price within the next couple of years. Does that seem plausible to you?
Yes, right. Well, I was the first ever assistant to Robert Farrell, a technician at Merrill Lynch. Bob was there, one of his assistants, 10 years after I left. Yeah, and we're good friends. And actually, he was on a radio show in London a couple of months ago, and the guy asked him at the end of the interview, it's like a 10-minute slot, and he said, well, who's really been the best on calling the market? And he said, Arch Crawford, that's probably got the best 30-year record. That was very kind of him.
And as we wrap up, give folks an idea how they can find out more about Crawford Perspectives, as well as your fax service.
The website has all of that information on it. It's Crawford Perspectives at earthlink.net. And if you don't know how to spell perspectives, you can just Google Arch Crawford, and it'll be the second or third one down. The astromoney.com is not the one. The Google still has that on top, and we abandoned that like 6 years ago. So it's the second or third one down. It's Crawford Perspectives. That's crawfordperspectives.com.